Your past does not determine your future, with special guest Kelsea Koenreich on today's episode. Today's episode is brought to you by Book Arbitrage Profits. If you want to start the ultimate side hustle, I can't recommend book flipping enough. Used books are continually going up in value. If you want to learn how to flip books and make 6 and even 7 figures, please join our free training at servetomaster.com/BAPS.
Are you tired of dealing with your boss? Do you feel underpaid and underappreciated? If you want to make it online, fire your boss and start living your retirement dreams now, then you've come to the right place. Welcome to Serve No Master Podcast, where you'll learn how to open new revenue streams and make money while you sleep. Presented live from a tropical island in the South Pacific by best-selling author Jonathan Green. Now, here's your host.
Now, I'm really interested in your journey, how you went from your old life, which had a lot of adventures and a lot of excitement, and finding your path, because a lot of people assume that the path to success is still, you go to the best kindergarten you can, get really good grades to go to good grammar school, get really good grades to go to good high school, really good grades to go to good college, get really good grades to go to a good graduate school, and then you just get handed a 6 or 7 figure job. But that wasn't your journey. I'd love to hear where your journey started, Kelsea.
Yeah, my journey was pretty much the opposite of that, actually. I did not go to college. I barely graduated high school. So I think that's what I stand for, is really disrupting the paths that have been laid for us. So my path was a lot of self-destruction, a lot of abusing my body, making choices that were not good for my mental or physical well-being. And those 10 years that I spent on that path of self-destruction actually were where I learned some of the most valuable lessons, which is how I've built my success. And so I think that as people, we have this idea that to build something successful, to become successful people, that we need to already be successful. And that's not the way that it works. It really does. It matters how we live each day and how we show up for each day, and that we're willing to fail and that we're willing to fall and get up again. So my journey started after my 3rd arrest and deciding that I was going to turn my life around and create something different. My journey was, like I said, just rooted in so much hurt and so much pain and so much trauma. And I decided that's not the life that I wanted to live anymore. And that honestly, if I would have kept going down that path, I would not be here today. So I actually believe in turning our pain into purpose, turning our failures into lessons, and using those to help us thrive and become successful.
I think that's really interesting. A lot of people would say, oh, the first time you get arrested is when you turn it around or don't. Either give up or you go all in, or maybe the second time, but then it took 3 times is very interesting, right? Because for most of us think, oh, going to jail the first time is rock bottom, but it's not always that, right? For everyone, it's different. I think that's really important to know, is that it's your past, like I want to say the top it is, your past doesn't control your future. Like everyone has a past. It's so often the power our past has is when it's a secret. If it's something that people don't know about, then we're always worried about it coming out, right? Like everyone has a past and everyone makes these assumptions. And it's always interesting when people usually assume whatever their background is your background. Like people went to college, always assume I went to the same kind of college. They have graduate degrees, same I have the same graduate degree. We make that assumption. Just like every time I read a book, every main character looks like me. I read Hunger Games, still thought it looked like me, right? Like that's how we see the world.
Yeah.
So what was it that pushed, or what was that moment like when you said, I'm going to build my own business? What was that transition moment like, which maybe was a little further in your journey?
Yeah. It's interesting because it wasn't that quickly after. I believe that I've always been an entrepreneur at heart. Even when I was working, I always was looking of how can I do this better? How can I make this better? It would just came very, very natural to me to see the blind spots and be able to strategically move things around. And that, coupled with my love for transformation and change of the human themselves, is really what my business has turned into today. So the moment that I decided I wanted to start my own business, after getting arrested and really committing to changing my mental health, I devoted myself and committed myself to my physical health. And I fell in love with the gym and movement, and specifically powerlifting. And from that moment on, I was like, I feel so good. I want to help other people feel this good. And so it was that simple choice. And that choice led to me working at a big box gym, and I was making $7 a session. And I was like, this is such bullshit. Like, what am I doing? And I was like, my mind again just really works in the way of, okay, this can be better. How can I do this differently? And I'm like, why am I working for somebody else? I don't need to work for somebody else. There's no reason that they need to be charging $50 and I'm getting seven of that. That makes zero sense. I'm the one doing the work. And so that turned into my own personal training business, which then turned into online coaching back in 2011 before everybody was an online coach. And my business just kept evolving and growing. And I was so in love with personal development, and that became a part of my structure. And then because I had been online for so long and learned so much, people were asking me for my lessons and how had I built the success and what was I doing? And that led to business strategy. And it's just all this beautiful evolution now of where I am to where it's the deep work of personal development mixed with the success and the steps to get where you want to go.
I think that's really interesting because, especially for people who've been to jail, it immediately becomes something you have to put on every resume. And it's so hard to get hired because everywhere looks at you like, oh, I hope you're not going to murder me or steal. Like there's this judgment that comes with it, right?
Yeah.
And I have a lot of my friends from high school did time, most of my friends, and it becomes this judgment. Yet in the world of entrepreneurship, it never comes up. Like it's not the same assumption. Like people come to my website, there's not that question on every order form, like, oh, what's Jonathan's background? People only care yes or no, does it work or not? But when you're trying to get hired and work in someone else's business, so I actually think that entrepreneurship is better for people that have that background, that actually have the stigma, because it disappears. What people like is the story of the person who overcomes. So suddenly what becomes a negative when getting employed is such a positive when you're an entrepreneur, because now everyone's like, wow, you overcame something, rather than thinking, wow, you're still that, right? It completely changes how we perceive it. So I think that's what's something really powerful about your story, is that as soon as you switched from I'm going to be an employee, they're giving me 14% of what they're making, to I'm in charge, your story became an asset, which is what I want people who have these type of backgrounds to realize, is like entrepreneurship is actually a better opportunity for people with these disadvantages, because it often removes them or makes them into advantages, which is such a powerful thing. So I think that's why your story is so inspiring for a lot of people that are thinking, oh, I want to start a business, but this or that. It's like, yeah, people will judge you less when you're an entrepreneur, right? Like most of the
I
people.
agree.
So I think that's really amazing. So now you have children of your own, and when you're thinking about their path, like, are you gonna what do you think the future is like for them? When you think about the future of entrepreneurship, like, are you gonna drive them all to the traditional path, high school, college, and figure out? You're like, no, start your own business and start entrepreneuring now. Like, how do you approach that when you're passing it to the next generation?
I love this question. Yeah, I have three little kids. So my kids right now are 6, 4, and 1. And it's really interesting because kids, they hear words, but really what they see is your actions. And so it's very interesting to me. My oldest son, he got all of these there was all these leftover party favors from my middle daughter's birthday. She had a baby shark birthday, and there was like these little stupid bracelets and all the shitty little plastic things that you buy for parties. And he took these things and he got a bucket and sat at the end of our driveway and laid the stuff out and set up a shop at the end of our driveway, unprompted. Like he just wanted to sell stuff. And I thought that was so interesting because your question of which way am I going to push them? My answer is I'm not going to push them in any direction. I'm going to let them choose. I think that my husband and I are both entrepreneurs. And so I think that it's highly likely that my children will be entrepreneurs, but I'm okay with whatever they feel like is best for them. For me, it's just about reminding them that they always have the freedom of choice, that they can do both. They can have their own business and work a traditional job. And I think that's a really important thing for us to show our children, for us to model as individuals, is that it really is, you do have that choice. Some people forget that entrepreneurship is such a beautiful place to be able to, you literally get to make your own rules. And sometimes that makes it harder because there's no manual for you specifically. But yeah, I always jokingly say, I hope my kids don't go to college so I don't have to pay for it. But whatever they choose, whatever they love to do, my son loves music and art. And He plays the guitar. My middle daughter's a little athlete. So they're involved in lots of things. And we believe in exposing them to things and letting them lead really with their passions and what they love.
Yeah, I think one of the advantages of entrepreneurship is that we see everything as a path. Like, I was really smart as a kid. Like, I was the nerd. I was great at school, bad at making friends, right? And I don't wish that on anyone. Like, that's not what I wish for my kids. And it's created one path, but some of the people I work with who make a lot more money than me didn't graduate high school, terrible at school. They had a different skill set. This assumption that intelligence is the best skill set is something as entrepreneurs we realize it's not really true. The thing I've learned, the most important thing I've learned is you only have to be good at one thing. And you can just be really, really good at that one thing. And you can build an entire business around it, whether it's playing guitar or painting. Or I have a friend who has a huge business that just teaches high school athletes how to jump 1 inch higher. Everyone in basketball wants to jump a little higher, right? There's enough people. That's all he does. One product, not very expensive, hundreds of thousands of customers because he knows one thing really well. So I think that's the most important lesson for me when I'm working with my kids. Like, not all my kids are good at school. And that's something like everyone around me is like, oh, are you freaking out because you were so good at school? I'm like, yeah, it didn't really pay off for me. My wife barely graduated high school, has exactly the same amount of money as me, lives in the same house as me, doesn't work all day. I think she's smarter than me. She figured it out. Like, right? This assumption that I'm here working on a call with you right now, she's hanging out with the kids. She's winning. So there are so many ways to succeed in life, but often, especially, I think my parents were part of maybe the final generation that thinks that the best path to wealth is college. And now the college is like $250,000. I would rather, honestly, just invest that in building a business for them. So I totally understand where you're coming from. Like, if they want to be a doctor or a lawyer, yeah, you got to do college. But if you want to learn art, there's a lot of ways to get good at art without spending a lot of money in college. Or I have a friend who went to college for saxophone. And I was like, I don't know if $300,000 for saxophone lessons is like a really good return on investment. So, you know what I mean? There's some things you can study that I'm like, I'm not sure about that one. So it's very interesting to see that. I love talking to other parents because I have 4 kids between 2 and 9. It's the same conversation I have with my wife and myself. It's like, do we need to set aside college funds? I was like, my kids aren't going to college. We're not that kind of family. I'd rather give them 20 grand to start a business 10 times, right? Like, you're gonna hit 1 out of 10. That's what's so crazy. So let's talk about, I'm always interested in the difference between male and female entrepreneurship because I don't know what it's like to be a female entrepreneur, but I'm very fascinated in the different experience that I don't have. Like, what would you say are some of the things that are uniquely different when you're a woman entrepreneur? Like, I do notice that when you're a woman entrepreneur, every woman entrepreneur on Instagram, no matter what, there's always a percentage of the comments that are just like creepy dudes. I don't get those on my Instagram posts, right? Like, so that's something I was noticing that today. I was like, nobody ever just writes like, you look cute today, on a comment to me. I never get that affirmation. I don't like it. So that was one of the things I was noticing today. I was like, it's just once in a while would be nice, but I never get that. So what are some of the other things you notice, especially since your husband's also from entrepreneur, how things are different for each of you?
Yeah, I think there's so many different things here, but what I really think is important to speak on here is, as a woman, if you self-select into entrepreneurship, I think one of the most valuable things that you need to learn is how to use your voice. I think that's one of the things, the biggest difference that I see between men and women is simply their confidence, their belief in themselves. And I think that men don't necessarily always have that, but they're better at covering it up. Women are so quick, because we're conditioned to, we're so quick to move ourselves to the back burner, to quiet our voices, to not say the thing that we really want to say, to not bring ideas to the table that we think are great because we're afraid of being judged. And I think that's what holds a lot of women back. And specifically with a lot of my clients, that's one of the biggest shifts we make is I'm like, just say the fucking thing you want to say, because if you don't say what you want to say, then there are always going to be men that are jumping over you because they're not afraid to say it. So I think that there is sometimes less repercussions or judgment for men saying the same thing. And so that makes women be quieter. And that's the biggest difference that I've seen in my success. And I think that's one thing that's really driven me further is me being unafraid to say the thing that I really want to say, regardless of what comes of that.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. Like, the challenge as a man is that I don't know when someone's not saying what they're thinking because it's in the back of their mind. Like, it's hard to see that, right? Because it's just happening inside your head. So I don't know how many times I've been in a situation where that's happening. So that's why that's so interesting to me, because it is hard to see that one, right? Because you want everyone's voice to be heard. Like, I try to interview lots and lots of women on the show because it's interesting to me. Like I'm a huge fan of women websites. I buy a lot of products by women. I can always tell when I'm on a woman's website because I feel nice. So I was sitting in front of a window or drinking a cup of coffee or like smiling, right? Whereas a man's website, he's always got his arms over his head standing on a stage, right? And I'm like, it's such a different feeling. This is about success. This is about, you can feel nice. Like wearing, you never see a guy's website where he's wearing like big socks, curled up on the couch. Like, you know what I mean? It's such a
Yes.
different feeling. It's like, but I want to do that. I
Yeah.
want to be comfortable. I don't own any suits. I live on the equator. All my suits melted. It turns out there's a
Yeah.
temperature at which all my, like, someone's like, where's all your winter jackets? I'm like, they melted into a cube. It's so hot here. I had them in the attic. I didn't know that could happen, but it's such a different feeling. And I think that sometimes we miss that, especially as men, that it's okay to care about your customers. Like you can make a lot of money and care about your customers, which we don't often hear from the male side of the internet, right? It's usually like charge as much as you can, you eat what you kill. Like being on a sales phone call and thinking that is so uncomfortable for me. I remember first like, oh, this is how you do phone sales. And I was like, I'm talking to a victim. Like that mindset it's too aggressive, but that's where it comes from. Whereas it's like, I think there's a lot to be said for the better social connection that I'm helping you solve a problem. We're on a journey together is like an easier way to communicate for me, but you don't really learn that from a lot of men's content. So it's very interesting to me to hear these ideas because as guys, we don't know, there's so many things we don't notice, right? Like when someone's uncomfortable or not. Also, like I'm not very good at social cues. I always tell people that up front. I'm like, don't be subtle. Just like don't subtle. Before my wife, all my girlfriends was like, if there's something you don't like, don't give me a hint. Like make a big post or I'll miss it. It's not intentional. And it's very interesting. A lot of the guys I work with or a lot of the guys I know in business have their biggest issue was they didn't know how to talk to people. One of the guys I'm working with right now is like, yeah, I used to write down small talk and then practice it in the mirror before I would say it to people. And such a different thing. I was the same way. I had to learn how to make friends, which is such a strange thing to say. I studied someone when I was 17. So there's always something. I think that's an important lesson. Everyone thinks their thing is unique. I was like, oh, I'm the only one who had it. Then I found, oh, someone's got it worse or someone's got it different. And it's important to see that everyone has a story. And I think that's what makes us really unique. So along your journey, what are some of the things that you learned in the later parts of your journey, like you wish you'd known 10 or 15 years ago, or things you could pass down to that younger version of yourself, whether it's more confidence or kind of knowing it's okay to jump the price earlier? What are some of the things that like you passed down to that younger version of yourself so you could grow even faster?
Yeah, it's interesting because I think like before I answer that question, I wanted to say something about what you were just saying because I think it's really important for us as human beings to recognize that there is not just one pathway. There's the masculine and the feminine, and both of them, whether you are a male or a female or whatever you identify as, it's important to have a balance of both, right? So I think for a lot of men, it's challenging because you've been conditioned to be hardened. And feminine is like you're supposed to be softer. And so if we only identify as one or the other as far as balancing those energies, it doesn't feel like we're in alignment because it's like you're having to put on a facade because you have to have show no emotions because you're a man. And then women, if you show an emotion, then that's too much. So I just think it's an interesting thing to think about just as people and in business, whether again, if you're a man or a female, just figuring out like we tend to lead, especially as entrepreneurs, we a lot of times will lean into the masculine and say, this is the way that sales need to be. This is the way that it was done. But again, I go back to my comment before of like, there's really no manual for this. You get to be the manual. And I love what you said about like just making genuine connections and building genuine relationships with people, because that's how I built my entire business, was using my story to relate to people, to say, hey, I've fucked up too. I've been there too. I know what it's like. I can help you overcome, versus this like, very hard, dig into their pain points. This is how you sell, that a lot of sales processes teach. So I just wanted to say that piece. And I think that if there was really anything that I would take from now and give to my younger self, or even a younger entrepreneur who's just starting, regardless of your age, it's really to focus on your personal development to drive your business. Every single woman that I work with, every single man that I've had a conversation with, if we peel back the layers of the issue that they're seeing in their business and their success, everybody wants to blame strategy. Everybody wants to blame action. But the thing is that if you are laying out a beautiful plan, a beautiful strategy, a beautiful funnel, whatever it is for the business, you have to be a different kind of person in order to execute and follow through on that plan. Meaning that so many people will continue to hire mentors, buy programs, buy into frameworks that are like, here, we're going to lay out the exact steps to get you to $1 million or whatever it is. And then they wonder why it doesn't happen for them. It's because number one, you're not them. And number two, you aren't being the person that you need to be to execute on those steps. Because if you show up half-assed with no confidence and no belief in yourself, you're not going to actually execute in the way that it needs to be executed. So if there's one thing that I would say to myself, it would be to believe in myself and to commit to continued personal development and pouring into my belief and my worthiness and my value in myself.
I think that's something really interesting because I remember when Seth Godin wrote that book, The Dip, which is, a lot of people quit right before they're about to succeed. And I always think about when people say, oh, she's an overnight success, he's an overnight success. And it's only if you don't count the 10 years of grind, right? Like sometimes people like say, oh, Jonathan, you're overnight success. I lived in my mom's basement for a year and then my friend's couch, a studio apartment for a year and a half. Those don't count. Like those are not 2.5 years of success, right? Those are 2 years of nightmare. And we always ignore the grind or the suffering or the hard work that gets there because we go, oh no, we just figure out. Like I wish I don't know anyone who wrote their first album in one night or who learned the guitar in one night. Like I would love to do that, but we're so busy looking at the success and we often minimize the way to get there to make the success seem bigger. And then we look at ourselves like here's the secret to my success. I work every day. I work 7 days a week. I built out a schedule. Like I don't want to work 8 hours a day. I'd rather work 5 hours a day, 7 days a week than 8 hours a day, 5 days a week. That's the decision I made. But also I come from a family. I remember my dad had a conversation. He goes, hey, you shouldn't work more than 6.5 days a week. Like that's the heavy work mindset that I came from. I was like, that's some really bad advice, right? Like that tells you how much my dad was overworking. If he's like, don't work more than 6.5 days a week. And he was working 10-hour days. So he was like, don't work more than 100 hours a week. And that's something that like my one regret with my kids, that's why I work from home. That's why I never lock the door to the office. That's why my kids blast in here sometimes during podcast episodes. I can lock the door, but I don't want to create that. I always want them to come in here, even when it disrupts my work or causes problems. I want them to feel that welcomeness. But we're often taught that the key to success is short. We see every sales video is like, oh, become a millionaire in 6 weeks, push one button, flip this switch. And here's the secret to my success is consistency. Every single person who's really successful just gets up every day and does it every day. And whether it's a good day or bad day, you keep going. But I think that especially for new entrepreneurs, they're looking for a reason to quit or an excuse or a reason to jump out. I can always tell, like when I'm working with a coaching client or talking to someone, they're looking for a reason to prove it doesn't work so they can go back to their original belief. And that's in any area, right? It's like there's people that go, oh, you can't lose weight. Diets don't work. I'll try your diet for 2 weeks, prove it doesn't work. I can go back to doing what I want because that's what you really want.
Absolutely.
And I think that's the thing in so many areas that it's not easy. Like I also hate when people say, oh, do a job you love, you'll never work a day in your life. It's like, that's not true. I love my job. I'm still at work right now, right? I have all the lights set up, the background lights, the audio, all of this is set up after the call. I have to download and edit. That's still work. Like I like what I do, but it's still hard. I think that people think, oh, if I just pick the right entrepreneurship, it's easy. It's like, no, it's still a job, right? But at least there's no one to shout at you, but there are different challenges. I worry that so many people think entrepreneurship is like, oh, I just don't have a boss. No one will shout at me and it's easy. And then when it's hard, they're not ready for it.
Yes. And I think that a lot of that has come from some manipulative marketing that's taken place, especially over the last few years, is that like social media is beautiful, but in the same sense, it doesn't paint a realistic picture. It's like when you put yourself in the room with millionaires, multimillionaires, people who you view as successful, you're going to find out some things that you're like, oh, wow, I didn't realize that. And I think that one of the things that I speak about frequently to a lot of audiences is building resilience, because I think, like you said, consistency and resilience really, those are the biggest keys to success. There is no magic key, no magic code, no instant gratification that comes. It is you being committed to the work. And I believe absolutely in balance. I personally work about like 25 hours a week, but I have three little kids too. So it's like, that's what I've set my life up for. So I believe that there's a way to be committed to your work. But I think that the problem is that some people paint an unrealistic picture and some people just lie because it sells. And that's something that I think has to change in the coaching industry, especially, is that we need to be in integrity and people need to be telling the truth about what's really going on.
Yeah, it's interesting you bring up coaching because I do so little coaching because I don't like sometimes I meet people that coach coaches who coach coaches who coach coaches. I was like, that doesn't sound real, but that's an industry, and I know people doing really well doing that. I'm like, it sounds fake,
Yeah.
and I've always been hesitant to that because I like a measurable result. Like when we work together, at the end of it, you'll have your book written, or at the end of it, you'll have your business structure. There's something measurable result. That's how because I have that type of mind, the analytical mind, the measurable result mind. But so many people, especially over the last few years, I met so many people like, oh, I became a coach when? The day after I lost my job, right? It's so many, it used to be real estate 20 or 30 years ago. When people got fired, they immediately became real estate agents. I remember so many people lost their jobs I knew in the early 2000s were real estate agents the next day. Now it's all coaches, and you're exactly right. The other challenge is we often compare other people's on stage to our backstage. So what we're seeing is especially on Instagram, everyone is photoshopped. And if you don't know that, you don't realize that. One of my friends about 10 years ago was a photographer for Italian Vogue. And he said, oh, on average, you take a picture of a model, you spend 12 to 15 hours photoshopping it. So you take someone who's already astoundingly beautiful, and that's not good enough. I was like, 12 hours of Photoshop. That's so much. Like that's so many changes. And that's why we have these unrealistic expectations. Because then you see the person, they look nothing like it. And that's why, because you've only ever seen them photoshopped. Like recently in movies, they've developed the technology where everyone suddenly has blue eyes. That's another computer thing. So more and more, you're exactly right that we're not seeing reality. And so we're comparing ourselves. Like I always say to people, before you follow me, make sure you want my life. I live on an island in the middle of nowhere. There's so many things I can't do, but it's the trade-off. It's what I want. If you don't like this life, I'm not the person to follow. If you want your kids to go to college, don't follow me because that's not what I talk about. That's not what I do. That's not my mindset. And we often follow people who have all these billionaires we follow, who people like admire. Their lives are terrible. They have a 6 or 7. Their kids change their names to not have the same name as you. Like, I don't want that. Like, even people that are really admire the most famous Japanese cartoons, the Miyazaki movies, right? And his kids hate him. Like he made the most famous children movies for 20 years in Japan. His kids are like, yeah, I wish my dad had spent more time with us instead of everyone else's families. So even people that we admire, we don't look at, it's like, do you want that life? Do you want that? Do you want to set the new record for the biggest divorce? Like the $1 billion divorce, the $10 million divorce, all of these, we think that because we look at one part. I think it's so important when you're choosing a coach or a person to follow that you look at the whole. Like, are they the kind of person you want to be? Because whoever you follow, you're going to end up like them.
Yeah. Yeah. And the other piece of that is like when we're thinking about hiring mentors or people to follow, it's what is actually happening behind, like you said, the backstage. Like what is, because for me, when I've hired mentors in the past and I been starting coaching with them, I'm like, I don't want this. Either they're working way more than they pretend to, or they're not present parents. And so it's just against what I believe because I believe I work from home. I have three little kids. I believe in being able to have both. And I think that's something that really is hard for people to grasp is that like it has to be one or the other because we're such extremists because we like black or white. And it really is like create your own gray, right? Like create your space and what is the optimal amount of time for you to work and be committed to your craft, be committed to your passion while also being present in your life. And that's why I always say that your ambition, your drive, your desire for success needs to run parallel with your peace, your presence, your fulfillment, and your joy. And that's really what I take a stand for overall is that we don't sacrifice our mental or our physical well-being or our relationships because that's not real success.
Yeah, a few years ago, I built an office that was like 100 yards from my house, and I was so efficient. I would go there at 6 in the morning, finish at 6. I never got more work done. And after a month, I go, I'm not doing this. what my life is now terrible. I leave when it's dark, I come back when it's dark. I live on a tropical island. I don't see the ocean. Are you kidding me? So I had, just like I said, I don't lock the door. Like I made these decisions because I don't want success at the cost of missing moments. Like I potty trained all four of my kids. All four of my kids, their first word was papa or dad, not mama. Like those are the moments I haven't missed any of those first moments. And every husband and wife, you're trying to win these little contests. And all of
Yes.
these moments I want to be there for. And when people don't talk about it, because it's like, oh, you can't have a business and have a good family, right? Like you can't have both. You have to choose. And I don't want to choose. I think what you're saying is really important, is to figure out what you want. Some people just want a ton of money, and some people just want to pay off their house, and some people want to spend more time with their families, and some people hate their families, right? But knowing what you want, it's so important, because whatever you're driving towards, if you don't know what it is, you'll end up nowhere. So it's exactly that, finding that balance where I spend enough time with my wife, enough time with my kids, enough time doing these other things that has these balances that, if we look at, yeah, there's some people who are doing like, come on, nobody actually lives the 4-hour work week. That's not real, right? I know he's working like more than 40 hours a week because he does more than 4 hours of podcasts a week, but we get caught up in something that's not real. And exactly that, we're caught up in it sounds really cool. That's why that book has that name. It sounds amazing, right? So catchy. And it's
Right.
just, I don't know if you remember,
Marketable.
I'm old enough. I
Not
remember when it was
reality.
like 10-minute abs, then 8-minute abs, then 6-minute abs, and 4-minute abs, right? And it was like the arms race of less minutes. I was waiting for the 3-hour work week, the 2-hour work week, the 1-hour work week. Like I was waiting for that arms race, the same thing. Because it's just, come on, you can't make abs in 4 minutes, right? You can't do 4 minutes a week and get super abs. Like I wish, that would be amazing, right? In the same way, maybe eventually you can build a business that you're doing 4 hours a week, but you have to put all these systems in place first. So I think what you're saying is really good, is like, know what you want and then look for someone who is in alignment with that. Because there are certain teachers that a lot of people really look up to. I'm like, yeah, I don't want their life.
Yeah.
They're estranged from their families, or they're on their like 6th divorce. Like
Yep.
I'm 42. I'm still my first wife, right? Like maybe I'm an anomaly, but that's where, and there's people my age who are on their 3rd or 4th. Like I don't want to do that.
Yeah. My
Like
husband and I
whenever,
just celebrated 10 years, so I'm with you.
yeah, whenever my wife says, "Oh, do you want to meet someone younger?" or whatever, I'm like, I don't want to get to know someone new. That's the part that has so little appeal for me. The thought of finding out someone's hopes and dreams and baggage, like my heart, like already at the thought of that's like making me dread. That's the part I hate the most. Like I already got to know you. I don't want to get to know another person,
Yeah.
let alone 3 or 4 or 5. One and done for me, right? Like
Yes.
this is
Yes.
so that's the type of people that I want to follow. Because yeah, sometimes you follow someone, you don't realize, oh wait, their kids hate them, their marriage is a disaster, or they're unhappy, like they're wealthy but unhappy. I don't want those things. So I think what you've shared is really cool. And the most important lesson for people to realize is that a lot of what we teach as commodities, what's different is the person, right? The transmitter of the message. So it's so important to realize that just as we choose a coach, we want to choose someone we want to be like. Your story is what makes you different. Like the things I do, I didn't invent writing a book or doing a podcast or building an online business. So there's nothing I teach that no one else knows, right? There's nothing proprietary in our world. So that's what really makes you special, is the same thing that you should do when looking for a coach, is your story, your personality, the way you speak, the things that matter to you, because it's different. Even though you and I are getting along really well, I'm sure there's probably hundreds of things that we teach differently, believe differently. And that's why 2 people could listen to us selling the same product and want it from one of us and not from the other. And that's what makes like the world such an amazing place. This has been really, really cool. I appreciate you giving me so much time. I'd love to give you the final thought and then let people know where they can hear more about you online and see more of what you're doing.
Yeah. Yeah. So just to loop back on what you were saying, one of the questions I tell people when you're looking for a mentor or a coach or some sort of guidance, a lot of times we ask questions about the result that we're going to get, whether that's a tangible result or an intangible result. And one of the questions that I tell people to ask what their personal values are. Because I think that's a question, when you align with a person, you're more likely to get better results. If there is misalignment there, if everybody is different, like you said, we all have different stories and different belief systems. But if there is some sort of overlap in the things that you value, you're more likely to see better results. And I think that's why for me and my clients, my client retention rate's really high. My clients stay with me for a long time because they know that one of my values is being committed to my own growth. And so just making sure that we pay attention and at who we're working with and who we're hiring and, like you said, who they are as people. So yeah, this has been great. I'm glad I got to come and share and talk with you and learn more about you. I love that you have 4 little kids too. And I just think it's so important to have leaders that are willing to say you don't have to choose, that you can be present in your relationships, present with your children, and build a really wonderfully successful business and live your passion and live your purpose. So, yeah. And if you want to follow me, come have a conversation, the best place to do that is on Instagram, which is Kelsea Koenreich. I'm sure that you'll have to type that out in the show notes because nobody's going to spell that right. And then, of course, my website, kelseykoenreich.com.
Yes, amazing. That is Kelsea for Kelsey, and then Koenreich for Koenreich. So thank you so much for being here. This was really exciting. I appreciate you giving me so much of your special and personal time. So this was amazing. Again, thank you so much for being here. I know the audience is going to love it. I look forward to the comments.
Yeah, thanks so much.
Thank you for listening to the Serve No Master podcast. Make sure to subscribe so that together we can achieve true freedom.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode of the Serve No Master podcast. Make sure you subscribe so you never miss another episode. We'll be back next week with more tips and tactics on how to escape the rat race. Please take a moment to leave a review at servenomaster.com/iTunes. It helps the show grow, and more listeners means more content for you. Thanks again, and we'll see you next week.